Now, before I start this video off properly, I just want to send my best wishes to Adam Weaver and the rest of the Powermax Racing team. Of course, if you haven't seen already, Powermax Racing unfortunately had a huge fire, which meant the loss of literally everything. They've lost their HQ, their warehouse, and obviously, unfortunately, they have lost their 3 Vauxhall Astra NGTC cars, including 7 TCR cars and 4 S2000 cars, former cars of the British Touring Car Championship. It is such a shame. It is devastating, the word that's been going around, and it's the only word anyone can actually think of. It is devastating to see and hear this, but at time of recording, it was announced a couple of hours ago that Powermax intend to race this weekend at Knock Hill, and I can only say best of luck to Adam Weaver and the rest of the PMR boys and girls. Really hope that they can get that Cupra running. Really hope they can make it to Knock Hill. It is going to be tough though. Literally less than a week to get there, but still, I wish the best of luck to Adam and the rest of the PMR crew. And yeah, hopefully we can see them back at some point this year. Obviously, hoping, fingers crossed, they can be there this weekend, but fingers crossed we see them at some point this year. And obviously, hopefully they can fully rebuild for a 2026 return. So that is that. But hello there everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Elliot Webber. It's been a while since I've actually stood in front of my phone and I've actually recorded a video that isn't an announcement or a trackside video. Yeah, it's been quite a while. Honestly, I've had a bit of a burnout from YouTube recently, a bunch of other things that have gone on behind the scenes, but still, I'm back. Raring to make another video, and in this video we are going to be talking about the 2027 TOCA regulations. So as always, let's get straight into this. Now, obviously, for those who somehow have been living under a rock the past couple of weeks, it has been announced that there will be some brand new technical regulations coming to the BTCC for 2027, which means for the series as we know it will remain the same at least until the end of 2026. So the BTCC as we know it currently will stay the same until 2026, where of course then this new cycle of technical regulations will take over. Now, I thought I'd just answer a couple of questions that some people might have about these new regulations. If you want to, you can also read an FAQ article that TOCA put out just before the races at Croft a couple of weeks ago. It gives a much more in-depth explanation as to what these 2027 rules are going to look like, way more in-depth than the way I'm going to explain it. I'm probably going to explain it in a much more simpler term. At least I'm going to explain it in the way I understand these regulations. So yeah, I will do my best, everyone. So starting off, is this the end of NGTC? No, it is not. The NGTC homologation and NGTC regulations kind of will stay as they are, which means all of these cars that you currently see, the Ford Focus, the BMW 330, the Hyundai i30N, the Cupra Leon, I was going to say Vauxhall Astra, but unfortunately that is no longer the case. But as we all know, all of these current cars that you see in their form will be eligible for the 2027 regulations. NGTC will live on, just it will look kind of, hopefully, maybe a little bit different. So that is the first thing. Does NGTC need to end? I mean, no, not really. Personally, for me, I don't think so. Yes, the grids have been quite stagnant when it comes to race cars. Obviously, the youngest car on the grid is the Cupra Leon, which was introduced in 2021, and we haven't seen any new cars since then. But still, I think NGTC is a great regulations format. Obviously, it's been in place since 2011. And it's done well for itself. It's done really well. Obviously, let's not forget that sort of peak period between 2015 and 2019, 20-ish, just before COVID pretty much. The BTCC was basically at its peak, where we were having 30 cars on the grid. We had close championship battles. Obviously, we had the likes of Colin Turkington, Dan Camish, Ash Sutton, Tom Ingram. Obviously, we still had Jason Plato and Matt Neal winning races. So it was and still is a great format for the BTCC. And some might argue the NGTC spec cars could be the greatest set of touring car regulations after the Super Touring. Obviously, obviously we all know how great Super Touring was, but I do think the NGTC cars are a close second. Obviously, they're difficult to drive, they're very heavy. Obviously, they are much lighter this year for 2025, but still, I think the NGTC cars have done their job, and I still think that they have a bit more to give. Because we've seen it this year as well. You know, obviously the majority of the cars are well over 5 years old now, but yet we're still getting close racing. Obviously we've got this epic championship fight between Ash Sutton and Tom Ingram, with obviously the likes of Camish, Rowbottom, Jake Hill, even Charles Rainford and Darryl De Leon. Josh Cook as well has been up there. So we've still got a very close championship this year, even with cars that are in a regulation set that's almost 15 years old, or is 15 years old. So yeah, my personal opinion for NGTC, they don't need to die, but I do think they do need to evolve some way, because I do agree the cars and the grid have been quite stagnant with the NGTC regulations, but still, don't change what isn't broke. So now let's move on to the next thing that you might like to know about the 2027 regulations. So the next thing we know about the 2027 BTCC TOCA regulations is that any model is now eligible so long as it meets the NGTC homologation spec, which basically means any car globally is now eligible to compete. Obviously, again, if it's within the NGTC spec regulations, but this is a big thing because it means a lot of cars that aren't sold in the UK can now come over and race in the BTCC, because before it was you had to have a car that was sold in the UK, which obviously, so the current cars on the grid, all on the grid, are sold in the UK as a road car, but obviously this means that now, for example, if BMW have a car that isn't sold in the UK, they can now bring that over to the UK, and so long as it meets the NGTC homologation, it can race in the BTCC. And I think this is something that could help Honda a lot if Honda ever do decide to come back. As we know, the Honda Civic is no longer going to be sold in the UK, I believe starting in 2026. Which means that if there ever is a future Honda Civic Type R that comes out between 2027 and 2031, it will be eligible as long as it meets the NGTC regulations. Now, this is a big thing. I think it does open up more cars from, obviously, across the globe to come over here. However, whether or not that will actually happen is yet to be seen, because as we know, running a motorsport team, running a motorsport car is very expensive, and whether or not a team would actually want to spend the money to bring over a body shell from worldwide, from a manufacturer, to bring it over here and then set it up to be homologated to NGTC spec, I don't know. That does seem quite expensive, but again, I'm no mathematician. I wouldn't be able to figure out the cost of that. But still, again, this is very interesting because, as mentioned, it opens up a much more variety of cars. Obviously, one thing that I've just been talking about is the lack of variety and the stagnation of the variety of cars that have come through in the BTCC in the past 5 or 6 years. So hopefully for 2027 we can see some more cars on the grid. We can see some new cars on the grid. I'd very much like to see the Hyundai Elantra, which I do believe should fit NGTC spec regulations. Obviously the Hyundai Elantra is a gorgeous looking car in TCR spec, so I'd very much love to see that in NGTC spec. So Hyundai, accelerate if you're watching this. Please bring the Elantra to BTCC. So yeah, now also another thing that's been pointed out quite recently, one thing that I pointed out personally, is that estates, SUVs and crossovers will be eligible, continue to be eligible, should I say, because some people might not realise, but estates, crossovers, SUVs, they are homologated, or they can be homologated to NGTC spec. Obviously, we've seen that recently, as recent as 2019 with the Subaru Levorg, obviously the championship that won Ash Sutton his first championship in 2017. Obviously, is where we saw that 11 years ago with the Honda, I can't remember what it was called. It was the Honda Civic Tourer, I believe it was called, in 2014 at the hands of Matt Neal and Gordon Shedden, but unfortunately wasn't as competitive as it was planned to be. Obviously did not win the championship that year, so obviously Honda swapped it for the FK2 Civic Type R. But still, this is once again very interesting, especially recently, especially as well with the UK car economy. Obviously, no one's making hatchbacks nowadays. You very rarely see hatchbacks unless it is you know, a Focus ST or a Focus RS or even a Fiesta ST, blah blah blah. You know, obviously the VW Golf is something that could come to BTCC because it does fit the current NGTC homologations, but obviously VW don't want to enter BTCC, so unfortunately I don't think we'll see the VW Golf anytime soon. But still, this does open the door, especially again with recently in the car economy. One car I would very much love to see is the Ford Puma. I don't know why, but I do think it's a good looking car in road spec, and I would very much love to see the Ford Puma in NGTC spec. So if Napa Racing don't move away from Ford next year, then I would very much love to see Napa Racing / Alliance go and have a crack at the Ford Puma. But this also does mean that the Range Rover is still eligible for 2027. Some of you may remember that there were plans for 2012 to have a Range Rover Evoque enter BTCC. So who knows, maybe we could see Range Rover finally into the BTCC after 15 years. So yeah, the next thing to talk about in the 2027 BTCC regulations is that engines can now mix and match with different car models. Now this one is very interesting, especially as of late. As we know, the Hyundai i30N is probably the fastest car on the grid. I think it's fair to say that. It's been stupidly quick in the hands of Tom Ingram. Of course, it's Tom Ingram, it's going to be a quick car. So I'm sure that teams that don't quite have a quick engine recently will very much love to hear this added to the rule set. For those of you who don't quite know what I mean, this basically means that any team from any manufacturer can now pick and choose what engine they would like to use in their car. For example, if West Surrey Racing decide to move away from the BMW engine but keep the BMW car, they can do that. So essentially, if West Surrey Racing want to run a Swindon built Hyundai engine, they can, obviously so long as it meets the TOCA homologation, which obviously it does, which is something that is quite interesting. And obviously it's vice versa. Let's say BMW have the best engine one year and Accelerate go, well, we'd like a crack at that engine. They can now choose to use the Neil Brown Engineering BMW engine and put it in the Hyundai. This is something that's very interesting, and I think it would make for great racing. It would also make qualifying quite interesting as well, because as we know, there are a ton of tracks that suits certain engines. One thing I think this would be interesting for is Thruxton, because as we know, Thruxton is more a chassis circuit. So if you don't have the right engine for Thruxton, then you know that could be your whole weekend done. So this one is very interesting, especially for teams that don't quite have speedy engines, don't quite have quick engines. For example, again, Unlimited Motorsport, if they wanted to now, they could pick and run a Hyundai engine. I'm sure costs do come into this. For example, I highly doubt that they can't just pick and choose what engine. Obviously a bunch of costs, and I'm sure customer deals would have to come into effect as well. So it obviously a bunch of other stuff, but I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can. So yeah, if Unlimited wanted to choose a quick engine, they could theoretically choose a BMW or a Hyundai engine. So that is very interesting. And now finally, the last thing is that I'm sure we all know the goal for these 2027 regulations. It is to reduce costs, attract more independent teams, and attract more manufacturers, which is what was said in the press release and the FAQ article TOCA put out a couple of weeks ago. This is hopefully to attract much more independent teams, maybe some teams from TCR to move over into BTCC, maybe teams from the Mini Challenge to make the step up, you know, a team like Pro Alloys Racing, Grades Motorsport as well, you know, maybe some teams that haven't had the budget as of recent years, but hopefully with hopefully, if this can reduce costs, then hopefully we can see more independent teams, and hopefully this can attract more manufacturers. Let's be real, there isn't really any manufacturer teams on the grid, because Accelerate make their own engines. Napa Racing get their engines from Mount Tune, which is why they're listed as a factory engine, and WSR, they're not really the BMW team anymore. Toyota, it's a sponsorship deal, so there isn't really any manufacturer teams on the grid. I'm sure what this means by is that maybe not interesting manufacturer teams per se, but also possibly, you know, attracting more manufacturers on the grid. I'm sure we'd very much love to see more car models and more manufacturers, maybe even returning manufacturers. I know there have been rumours that maybe Mazda could be coming back next year with Napa Racing, though I haven't heard anything of that in the past couple of weeks and months. But still, it's all very interesting, and hopefully with these 2027 regulations, the action is just as exciting, just as good, and hopefully we do see some new and returning faces, and obviously hopefully we see some new and returning manufacturers in 2027. So that is it, guys. Those are the key elements and the key things to look out for the 2027 BTCC regulations. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. Which manufacturer would you like to see back, or a brand new manufacturer enter the BTCC? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. Of course, if you are new around here, be sure to like this video, share with your mates, because it of course does help my channel grow, and of course press that subscribe button, because we are firmly on the road to 400 subscribers. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Goodbye.